Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Robert Litan, Economist and Nonresident Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. Robert, thank you so much for joining me.
And thank you for having me.
I want to talk about the three T's that have really dominated the headlines in the past couple of days, and those are Trump, tariffs, and trade war. And North America was almost brought to the brink and temporarily pulled back of a trade war between the United States and Canada and the United States and Mexico. That was placed on a 30-day pause. However, 10% additional tariffs on imports from China went into effect on Tuesday. So what's your reaction to this talk and subsequent action when it comes to tariffs?
Well, I think it's important to distinguish between two strategies that Trump has put forward, and it's not clear which one he's sticking to. On the one hand, there's the art of the deal Trump, which is to use tariffs to exact something out of another country, whether it's Mexico, Canada, China, whoever. And then there's Tariff Man Trump, who likes tariffs just because he likes tariffs across the board. And during the campaign, he campaigned very much on putting a 10 or 20% tariff across the board. He hasn't done that yet. And so far, he's pursuing the art of the deal approach, which has its limits. And for example, you don't have to listen to an economist to tell you this. We saw what the stock market did immediately after he put those tariffs on. And I think it was probably several hours after the market opened that essentially they pulled back. He caved. And so, if you're going to use tariffs as a negotiating lever, you have to be consistent about it. And if you continue doing this, putting them on, threatening, and so forth, and then caving, at some point people don't take you seriously.
Let's talk about that. Do you think we're at a point right now where it's almost like the boy who cried wolf, or the president who cried tariff, if you will? Because you're saying he likes tariffs. Doesn't seem like anyone I talk to likes tariffs. Economists don't like tariffs. The markets certainly do not like tariffs. So what do you make of this negotiating tactic? And don't you think that tariffs should be a last type of situation, a last lever, instead of seemingly one of the first ones?
So it certainly should be last resort. And by the way, I will give credit to Trump on one thing, and that is that when you're dealing with our adversaries, history has shown that sanctions they have only limited effect, or they only work if you get the whole rest of the world to go along with you. So I think we sort of come to the end of the road on sanctions. And again, with respect to adversaries, tariffs may be, if they're selectively targeted, they could be more effective in changing adversarial behavior. But when it comes to allies, for example, Canada is certainly an ally. I would put Mexico close to that. It frankly doesn't make any sense to basically threaten your friends that you're going to punish them when A, they're not doing anything wrong, or B, you can obtain the same results without the tariffs. So I'll give you a perfect example in Mexico. So Mexico, according to the Trump administration, we're complaining about all the fentanyl and the immigrants coming abroad, coming over the southern border. On the other hand, Mexico has a big complaint against the United States, and that's all the guns coming from the United States going down to Mexico and creating a situation where there's tremendous violence, and it's enabled the cartels to basically become a narco state. Now, when Trump withdrew the tariff threat against Mexico temporarily, he announced a deal where basically he said, well, Mexico is going to put more people on the border, or more troops on the border. And at the same time, we in the United States, we agreed to try to halt or at least slow the flow of weapons down to Mexico. That was a deal that could have been made without any tariffs, because you had two interests that were on either side that could have been traded off against each other. I think that what Trump is doing with tariffs is he's doing this to send a message to his base that he's tough. So far, it's more symbolic. Now, I will put China in a different category. I mean, China is a different situation, which we can talk about. But certainly with respect to our friends, These kind of tariff threats, which, by the way, he has threatened to impose against Europe, and Europe's our friend. You don't treat friends this way. You erode trust, and in the process, you erode all the credibility and goodwill that the United States has built up over 80 years. So this strategy of using tariffs as part of a deal-making strategy certainly doesn't make sense with respect to our friends.
And there was a blink if you missed it tariff threat to Colombia just a few weeks ago. So you're saying this sends a message to his base, hey, he's tough, hey, he's the art of the deal type president. Some critics have said this looks like a paper tiger move. It looks like he folded about the tariff threat. What message do you think this sends to the rest of the world? We'll talk about China in a little bit, but what happened with the tariffs and the 30-day pause between us and Canada and us and Mexico?
Well, it sends a lot of messages to the rest of the world. A, that we're not trustworthy. That at any moment, Trump, for whatever reason, can say, I don't like what you're doing, so I'm going to threaten you with tariffs. And this is the kind of behavior that needless to say, does not win you friends. Number two, it creates a lot of uncertainty for business. Because if you're trying to run a corporation, you want stability. You want to know essentially what prices you're going to be able to charge in another country, and to have these whipsaws of, maybe tariff today, maybe not a tariff today, it makes it much more difficult to plan investment decisions, whether it's here or investing abroad. It just complicates the life of business, which is one reason, of course, why the stock market hates this kind of off again, on again tariff threats.
I was speaking with an economist yesterday on the situation, and he echoed the same sentiment where the business community does not like uncertainty. So if the United States, in just a little bit over 2 weeks since Donald Trump came into office again, is threatening and then pausing tariffs on Colombia, on Canada, on Mexico, what does this threat and this looming pause of tariffs, what does that do to the economy? What type of impact does that have?
Well, if you're creating unnecessary uncertainty and you're diminishing investment, you're by definition dampening economic growth. You do this long enough, and you just create more and more uncertainty. At some point, by the way, if you keep doing this and create enough uncertainty, you morph from Trump, the art of the deal Trump, to a Trump that looks like an across-the-board tariff Trump. Because at some point, with so much uncertainty, then other countries don't want to deal with us. I mean, why would they? They would look to other markets because they can't trust sending their stuff to the United States. So, continuing this over a long enough time frame moves us from one world to another, which is frankly much more damaging to the economy than at least what we've seen in the first 2 weeks.
The tariffs that did stick over the past couple of days were additional ones placed on China, and China obviously is no friend of the United States. What do you make of that action?
Well, China is in a different bucket because there are actually several reasons. One is it's huge. It had a very negative impact on our economy, the sudden so-called China shock, which frankly a lot of economists did not expect. And has given trade a bad name, let's put it that way. Plus, China is not our friend. They're not our enemy. They're not our frenemy. They're in sort of some special category where we're not fighting with them. We don't want to fight with them. But on the other hand, we trade a lot with them because they are a market for our goods, and we like a lot of the stuff they produce. And it does hold down inflation in the United States. They buy our bonds, or historically have bought our bonds. We have a very complicated relationship with China. And so there can be a useful approach of using tariffs to get something concrete out of China, as long as it doesn't tip over and move us to a totally adversarial situation, which we do not want. We want stability. And I would be very careful about negotiating with China. Have very targeted objectives, get them, but not engage in this repeat behavior where you're threatening them always with tariffs. This is not the kind of behavior that's going to discourage discourage a country from pursuing more aggressive action. China will look at us as a totally untrustworthy actor, and this isn't good for world stability or world peace.
We want stability, but this sort of tit for tat, this escalation we're seeing with China in the past couple of days, where the United States slapped additional tariffs on them, they announced retaliatory measures, USPS stopped and then started accepting parcels from China. What do you make of that? And this escalation, where does it go?
Right now, no one knows where it goes, because once you get into a tit for tat cycle, I mean, who knows? Trump tomorrow could say, now that China's retaliated against us, he's going to ratchet it up another 10% or 20%. And then China could retaliate against us. And at some point, you totally decouple. By the way, there is significant settlement, at least from what I read in Trump world, for decoupling entirely from China. Decoupling from China will be enormously economically disruptive. And we're not there yet. But, a war where you go for tit for tat and you ratchet up and up and up, you move to a world of decoupling.
What if you're the everyday American who was concerned about the economy for the past year, is concerned that they can't afford groceries like they used to? What does this mean, this tit for tat, this trade war with China, the threat of tariffs to our friends and other countries alike? What does this mean for you?
Well, as long as tariffs are imposed, they're going to raise prices in the United States, notwithstanding what President Trump says. All right, it's Economics 101 that tariffs are paid by importers in the United States, and they pass those costs on to whoever they sell to, and eventually to American consumers. So, I mean, that's just a fact. That's Economics 101, and you can issue all the executive orders in the world, and it's not going to repeal the laws of economics. So, at the end of the day, consumers pay for all this. And consumers or workers will pay for the uncertainty that all this creates. Because as I indicated, more uncertainty is bad for business. Uncertainty discourages investment, and that's not what we need. Now, Trump wants to encourage investment. This is what's so odd about this. He wants to encourage investment through more tax incentives. He wants, a big corporate tax cut, and so you have these two completely opposite effects that he's causing. On the one hand, he wants to encourage investment through the tax code, but on the other hand, he's discouraging it through this erratic behavior with tariffs. The net effect may be no material benefit to American industry, and in turn to American workers, American consumers.
Trump has been known in his first term, and especially as his second term has gotten started, to flood the zone, to kind of throw everything at the wall, so it seems, and see what sticks. When you're looking at this from the perspective of an economist, what's sticking out to you, and what do you think is missing from this conversation?
Well, are we sticking to economics or to all the other things that he's flooding the zone with, which is, Elon Musk purportedly taking over the government and so forth, which, by the way, is not a comforting thought, and needless to say, injects an enormous amount of uncertainty and chaos. So, you can't do this for 4 straight years. I mean, collectively, at some point, the American people either tune all this out, because it's happening daily, and eventually, when somebody basically has a temper tantrum almost every day, at some point you ignore them, or you cause people to have a nervous breakdown. You cannot sustain this kind of everyday chaos that what they're doing. Now, I do recognize among a certain segment of the population that voted for Trump, this gives them a cheap thrill. All right. And it's giving a cheap thrill, but trust me, it's a cheap thrill. It's not going to last. And in the long run, it's damaging to our economy. It's damaging to our relationships with our friends. And by the way, we do need friends, notwithstanding what Trump has said about Europe or Canada or whatever. These are our friends. They supported us in World War I, World War II. These are countries that have been with us. They supported our fight against Al Qaeda. Um, uh, this is not the kind of atmosphere, it seems to me, that we want to encourage, where we're angering our friends. And I'm sure our enemies are looking at this and just saying, well, they're either laughing or they're saying, well, bring it on, because all this is doing is weakening the Western alliance. And so the victors out of all this are Russia and China, which we don't want to have happen.
And we saw Canadians booing America at a sporting event just a couple of days ago. And it sounds like this could actually be an expensive thrill because of the price you're saying we will have to ultimately pay. But we are in an area of uncertainty, as you said. We're close to 30 days of this pause. We are now seeing tariffs on China. What are you looking out for in the next month or couple of weeks?
Well, I'm hoping for some more stability. I don't think I'll get it. I don't think we'll get it. But I would sure hope that at least on the tariff front things would calm down, and I'm sure the business community would want that too. Let me make one important point that I don't think is widely understood, and that is when you tax imports, you also tax exports. So this is a zero-sum game, if not a negative game, and let me explain why. When you put on tariffs, what it means is that a lot of the inputs that American business, especially our exporters, need, they get more expensive. So that's one reason why it becomes more difficult for exporters to export. There's a second reason. When we reduce our imports from a particular country, what it means is that we're buying less of their currency in order to buy their imports. What that means is it changes the exchange rate. Other things being equal, when we put on tariffs, we actually appreciate the value of the dollar. The dollar goes up, those other currencies go down. Well, when the dollar goes up, that penalizes our exporters. So not only do they have to pay more for goods, for their imports, but now the ultimate prices of their products in foreign countries now is going to go up because the dollar value has gone up. So by taxing imports, we hurt our export industries. And I'll just tick off some of our big exporters. It's the whole agricultural sector. It's the industrial machinery, semiconductors and computers, aircraft. These are the big ticket items that we export. There are lots of people in these industries that work. These are people that don't immediately understand that they're being harmed by all these tariffs on imports. They're designed to protect American firms from foreign competition. And that leads to a final point that I think a lot of people don't understand. There's this belief that, for example, if I put a tax on China, or a tariff on China, which is really a tax on China, or Mexico or Canada, that is only going to affect those goods that come from China or Mexico, whoever's taxed. But that's not true, because all those American products that compete with the Chinese and the Mexican and Canadian imports, that means those prices will go up because they will face less competition from foreign producers. So even though, for example, trade may only account for 15% of our gross national product, when we put a tax on trade, we are also effectively encouraging price increases throughout the rest of that 85% of the economy that is not engaged in trade. So that's why the inflationary taxes on imports can have a much greater effect than just on the imports themselves.
I think that might be honestly the most important part of this conversation and the conversation on tariffs, because I don't think that's being talked about at all. This cascading effect of when you tariff just imports, that's not the only thing being taxed. Why do you think that is missing?
Well, I think, in common conversation, people tend to equate a tax on somebody else as only having a limited effect, and they don't think about what the wider impact is. By the way, that's something that we do in economics all the time. We say, look, there's going to be effect in one part of the economy. What's that going to do to the rest of the economy? And the people that advocate tariffs do not think things through. They don't realize that it has effects that transmit throughout the rest of the economy. And so that's why tariffs are they're damaging for consumers, not just for the goods that you're buying directly from that Chinese supplier.
We're only 3 weeks or almost 3 weeks into the Trump second term here. We're already engaged in a trade war. There's a threat of others looming. What do you think, or how do these types of trade wars typically end?
Well, they can end in a variety of ways. One is people give up and they back off, like Trump did after the stock market didn't like what he did on Monday. So, so one is you give up. Two is you just cycle upward and you just get worse and worse. The tit for tat grows and the negative effect compounds. There is a sort of a middle ground where you just live in a world of uncertainty. Who knows? One day Trump wakes up in the morning and decides, well, I don't like what X country is doing. I'll just threaten them with a tariff. And if he continues to behave like that, the rest of the world just basically loses trust in the United States and loses trust in trying to cement relationships to sell products to us or to deal with us. And by the way, as I said, it hurts our exporters too, because other countries will not trust us, and they'll encourage their companies to look for other suppliers. So I don't know which of these scenarios is going to happen, to be honest with you. I mean, whether we're going to quiet down, whether we're going to ratchet up, or stay somewhere in the middle. It's just very hard to predict. That's one of the consequences, by the way, of the first 3 weeks. So much is happening, so much uncertainty is being injected that it's impossible for anyone to predict what's coming next.
Well, I really appreciate you navigating this world of uncertainty for us and with us. And I hope you come back on and join me for many more conversations. Robert Litan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.